Peter, when you discuss Scientology and other groups, the phrase cult playbook often comes up. This suggests that the founders have carefully and deliberately selected mechanisms in order to create an effective high control group. I wonder how often it is actually more random. Let's say we look at 100 religious groups, martial arts dojos, knitting circles, etc. One has a lot of terminology, practically their own language. Others develop a strong shunning mechanism. Yet other groups will have traits of us versus them thinking, trance-inducing and thought-stopping practices, magical thinking, etc. Every now and then, there will be a group that is the perfect storm of lure and abuse. Eventually, this group will make it into the headlines, and then we will count how many of the cult playbook checkboxes it ticks. I think by now we have a rather complete set of traits of high-control groups, so we know what to expect. But was it deliberate design on the part of the founders, or is it an effect of selection because we tend to look at the most effective abusers? Peter, this is a great question, and it fits completely with the point I've been making for years, which is that it is an organic process in many, many, many ways. There are only so many things you can do to influence people. There are only so many things you can do to engage in indoctrination. And there are even, other things that you can do, even lesser numbers of things that you can do in order to engage in full-blown thought reform. Okay, so that's sort of this, if this is all the stuff you do in order to manipulate people, as you go down the line and get more and more and more intense with it, then there are certain things that come up that you have to do in order to maintain. Okay, in order to either recruit the person or retain them or deal with them after they have left. I personally believe that a lot of what we see in destructive cult behavior has to do sociologically with the formation of any new group with a strong, vital purpose that they think that, is very, very, very important, very big. But I think any group that is going to form up, you're going to have a tougher time of it at the beginning. You're going to be rougher on the membership. You're going to require more dedication from them in order to make the group kind of get over that hump. That point where you're blowing up the balloon and it's really hard to blow, and then suddenly it expands and you go, now I got the balloon blown up, and then you just keep pumping air and it just gets bigger and bigger. But that first bit is really hard to do. And I think that is what we see with the formation of almost any new group is one of the ways that a leader or the people who put that group together can treat the members of the group or start operating with the group is in a fairly harsh, dictatorial, authoritarian way. And they do that in order to ensure the group's survival. Now, with a group like Jim Jones's, People's Temple or the Branch Davidians down in Waco, you don't want the group surviving. They're a bad group. They do bad things. They have bad ideas. So I think in those cases especially, the harsher methodologies come into play. But really, those kind of methods can also come into play in good groups too. Sacrifices must be made, this kind of thing. I mean, this is the attitude of people who are really gung-ho in small groups as they try to get them up and into a viable range of activity where they really do become self-sustaining. Those are just some ideas I have about it, but I've seen those things play out. So in terms of, the cult playbook that I love referring to, it is simply the collection of, sort of writing down all the things that we have learned work. And the first cult playbook was Lifton's book, as far as I can tell, is in terms of documenting this stuff. And Lifton's book is The Psychology of Totalism, and thought reform in the psychology of totalism. And that was what offered up an 8-point analysis of what you have to do in order to really heavily manipulate somebody to the point of actual thought reform. And that's at the end of the spectrum of influence. You go from education or just talking to somebody all the way over to the harshest thought reform, right, which is past indoctrination. So that's where the analysis of this activity came from. But the activity's been going on for millennia. And people who rise to the top of these kind of groups, or of any group, learn along the way that this is what you got to do. Machiavelli knew this stuff, right? Bernays talks about a lot of this stuff. I mean, in terms of propaganda, in terms of the backstabbing and the intrigue, and these were guys who were also documenting a authoritarian or cult or totalist playbook, I guess you could say. Bernays was really just laying out all the propaganda techniques, but he didn't invent them. He was really more documenting what was either already known or what needed to be analyzed and figured out, but was already in play. People were already doing this stuff. Of course, with propaganda, you get that's not exactly the same thing as the cult playbook. The propaganda playbook is similar, associated to it, but not exactly the same. So anyway, yes, I believe that as you've asked here, I think you're going to see this stuff all over the place. And you don't have to study it first in order to actually do it, or do it, effectively, put it that way. However, you also do have people like Keith Raniere from NXIVM, who is now going to be serving 120, years in jail, who do study, who do try to look, who do try to figure out. I believe Jim Jones did that too. I think he spent quite a bit of time with evangelicals and learning how they, how ministers and stuff operate. So you can study, you can go learn it, and then go apply your, the benefits of your learning in a nefarious way. You can totally do that. And I'm sure a bunch of these guys along the way hit walls and went, oh man, how do I deal with this? And did a little bit of study, or called a few people, or tried to figure out what do I do here or here. Entirely possible. So I think that's how kind of the picture works. And I think as we are going and we are studying this and talking about and trying to figure this out, the more accurate information we can put into the documentation and build this cult playbook, so we can see what they're doing and how to counter it. And there you go.